Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. We are learning Maseches Rosh Hashana, Daf Ches. We're starting 14 lines or so from the bottom of Daf Zayin Amud Beis at the words Mesve. On Shabbos, we concluded the Gemara by mentioning the fact that there are a couple of different ways to look at our Mishnah, a couple of different lenses to look through. And the Gemara begins by asking a very practical question, which is that we know the first word in our Maseches Arba, that there were 4 Rosh Hashanahs. So says the Gemara, 14 lines from the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis Mesve. We have a source in the Tanaim that doesn't seem to agree with the list that was put together in our Mishnah. Shisha Asar b'Nisan. The 16th of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah LaOmer. We know that the change from Chadash to Yashan was the Hakravas HaOmer that was brought on the 16th of Nisan. And as well, Shisha b'Sivan on the 6th day of Sivan, that's Rosh Hashanah L'Shtei Alechem. Not every korban gets to have that kind of reference, but it gets a Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, says the Gemara, LeRava, according to the Shita of Rava, he should look at our Mishnah, Lisni Shisha. Our Mishnah should say that there are 6 days of Rosh Hashanah throughout the year. And the Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who looked at our Mishnah slightly differently, but still, Lisni Chamisha, either way we look at it, our Mishnah should have a greater count than 4. So how does the Gemara get out of that? The Gemara is going to present 3 answers that will bring us to the 2 dots at the top of the page. Here's answer number 1 as to why our Mishnah only lists 4 and doesn't list 5 or 6 Rosh Hashanahs. Answers the Gemara, answer number 1. Amar Rav Papa, Ki Kachashib, when our Mishnah was making the calculations of how many Rosh Hashanahs there are, Midi de Chayil Me'orta, we were only talking about things that began at dark, that began at night. Midi de lo chayil me'orta, but if there was a Rosh Hashanah that didn't begin at night, so then lo kachashiv, that wouldn't apply. So let's look at the 2 things that the Tosefta, that the Brisa said we should add. It said we should add the Omer, which was only karev during the day and not at night. So therefore it doesn't apply. And the second answer that the second Rosh Hashanah the Gemara recommends is the Rosh Hashanah L'Shtei Alechem, which was brought by Shavuos, and that also was only brought during the day. So says the Gemara, that's a great answer to preclude those 2. But asks the Gemara 7-8 lines from the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis v'harei regalim. What about our reference to regalim, which is code word for the Isser of Baal Te'acher, as mentioned at length? Baal Te'acher is the prohibition, an Isser Deoraisa, and the Bittul Aseh. If a person makes a commitment to bring a korban and they don't bring them within the requisite time, then they violated the Isser Baal Te'acher. So Baal Te'acher, there too, korbanos can only be brought during the day. De lo chayil me'orta. We see that that's not brought, that doesn't have a rule of night. That starts during the day. Nevertheless, our Mishnah included that. That shouldn't work. It breaks the rule that you just tried to recommend, Rav Papa. The Gemara says, no, that's not correct, because your chiyuv to bring it began before the holiday began. Says the Gemara, Kevan shetzarech le'isuye me'ikara mechayev v'koye. Since your obligation to bring it was prior to the regel kicking in, that day, that holiday upon which you would have been chayav for Baal Te'acher, since it's true you can't bring it until the morning, but your chiyuv began prior to the onset of that holiday, therefore it can still be included. Says the Gemara, fine, let me ask another kasha against you, Rav Papa. Rav Papa, you want to say that the only things that are included in our Mishnah are things that begin with the night. What about this one? V'harei Yovlos. What about the 50th year? So we know that after 7 cycles of 7 years, the 50th year is a Yovel year. And Rashi fills in the gaps for us here. This is when we see the word Yovel, it doesn't give us enough information because we're not well educated on this stuff. I certainly am not. And the Gemara says on the second of the Rashi, says about 7 lines or so from the bottom, 2 lines into the widest lines. Dibur hamaschal v'harei Yovlos. De katani b'Rosh Hashanim de Masnisen, says the Gemara, de lo chayle el al yedei tkiyas shofar. The only time that happens, when does Yovel kick in? With tkiyas shofar. The bezdin, that bezdin will blow. Ve'ena ela b'yom. And that shofar is not blown at night, it's only blown during the day. D'chsiv b'yom ha'kippurim ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzachem. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. How could you include Yovlos, Rav Papa, if what you're saying is that the only things we include in our Mishnah are things that apply from the night prior, and not only things that apply from the day of? Let's look back in the Gemara, 7 lines up, on the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis, v'harei Yovlos, de lo chayil me'orta v'kachashiv. Yovel doesn't start unless there's going to be a shofar that's blown on Yom Kippur Day. And if the shofar is going to be blown on Yom Kippur Day, it shouldn't apply. That breaks the rule of Rav Papa. Says the Gemara, v'kachashiv. Nevertheless, it's included in our Mishnah. And the Gemara answers, and we'll speak about this at more length as we get to the end of the blot today on Daf Ches. Says the Gemara, Reb Shmuel ben Osh Reb Yochanan ben Berokahi. This this question is a great question. And as long as we hold like the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel ben Rosh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruka, we can get out of it. Because unlike the sheets of the Chachamim, that Yovel doesn't start until the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. That's think about that. There's like a twilight zone. You have 49 years in a row, 7 cycles of 7. The 49th year is a Shemitah year. Then it's Rosh Hashana. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, all the way up to, but not including Yom Kippur, is not yet Yovel. It's twilight.
Can you plant and work
so the Gemara is going to tie. It's a twilight. So the Rabbanan say, and it's a very tough shita to really understand. We're going to spend more time on it tomorrow, but they hold that it doesn't start until that time. But to make the sheet of Rav Papa work, we hold Rav Papa seems to hold like Rav Shmuel ben Rosh Rav Yochanan ben Baruka de Amar. He holds that when does Yovel start? May Rosh Hashana Chayil Yovel. There is no twilight zone of Aleph to Yud in the month of Tishrei. Yovel starts mamish at the exact turn of the clock on Rosh Hashana. All done. So all of this is approach number 1 to solve our question. Let's review. Our Mishnah said there's 4 Rosh Hashanas. The Brisa says, hey, what about the 16th of Nisan? And what about the 6th of Sivan? Our Mishnah excludes them. Rav Papa says that's because their chiyuv only starts during the day and not at night. Let's see if we can find another answer. 4 lines from the bottom. Rav Shisha Bereder of Idi Amar, Kika Chashiv. When our Mishnah was deciding what to include, it was midi de lo tali b'maisa. The things that are included in our Mishnah are things that don't require an action to take place. But midi de tali b'maisa, but had it been that there was an action that needed to be done, lo kachashiv, then it would be excluded. The barley needed to be brought on the 16th of Nisan, and the shtei alechem needed to be brought on the 6th of Sivan, so therefore they're excluded. There's an isser of bal te'acher. How do you solve the problem of bal te'acher? By bringing a korban. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. The way you violate Baal Ta'achar is by doing absolutely nothing. That's what the Gemara says, bottom line. Baal Ta'achar memelecha. No, it automatically kicks in. The second you open your mouth and say, I'm obligating myself in a shlamim. The second you do that, automatically kicked into action is that you need to wait for the Shalosh Regalim in order to violate that Isser. It's a classic example. And then the Gemara at the very top of Chesem and Aleph says, wait a second, Hare Yovlos. What about Yovel? You have to blow the shofar. Says the Gemara, don't worry. Yes, you're right. The shofar is blown on the 10th. But remember the shita that we learned just a couple of lines ago. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rav Yochanan ben Baruka. What does he say? When does Yovel start? On Rosh Hashana. Automatically, without you blowing shofar. And that works out perfectly. So very good. That's answer number 2. What's answer number 3 about why it is that our Mishnah counts 4, even though we had the 16th of Nisan and the 6th of Sivan? Says the Gemara, Ravashi Amar, Arba'a Rosh Hashanah Mehain, Shehain Be'arba Rosh Chodashim. We're only including things in our Mishnah that are on Rosh Chodesh. So that's fine. Then you can exclude the 16th of Nisan with the Korban Omer, because that's not the first. You can exclude the 6th of Sivan. Says the Gemara, that's cute, but Be'echad B'Shvat Ki Be'Shamai. Everybody knows that Tu B'Shvat Hikiya Chag Ha'ilano. But what does our Mishnah say? Only Beis Shammai holds of Aleph of the month. So Ravashi, if you want to tell me, I have a beautiful solution to everything in our Mishnah is only going to be on a Rosh Hashanah, on an Aleph of Rosh Chodesh. So that's a problem, because Beis Hillel holds that it's on Tu B'Shvat, and we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, we paskin like Beis Hillel. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kama. This is Pshat. Shlosha l'divrei hakol. Really, Ravashi says you're absolutely right. So he just kind of backtracks one step. He says 3 of them are without question. And be'echad b'shvat machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. This is a very difficult answer. Ravashi says, yeah, no, I only partway mean my line, but we paskin like Beis Hillel for Tu B'Shvat. So great, but once you're paskening like Beis Hillel for Tu B'Shvat, why do you not then include the 16th of Nisan and the 6th of Sivan as Rosh Hashanahs for their respective halachic? So I'm asking a question on my own. It just pops off the page to me. The whole point of the argument was to not include those 2 things. So if you're going to tell me that everything's on Aleph of the month and you're wrong about it, so then your answer is not an answer. But the Gemara seems to not have a problem with it. Obviously, it means we're missing something. The Gemara is not missing something. Maybe the Rishonim deal with it. I didn't have any time to look into it, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Says the Gemara 5 lines down on Chesed Aleph. We saw in our Mishnah, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim be'echad b'tishrei, that there was a machlokes in regards to.
I think what Rashi's saying in the end here is that which we say Arba Rosh Hashanah, that's according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel would hold it to 3.
But the Gemara is like incredulous about that. Like we don't paskin like Beis Shammai.
I'm not saying it's better, but that's how you would have to read it.
That's
Rosh
pashtus.
Hashanah
But
hang.
the Gemara's question is it doesn't even give enough credence to
No,
that. It doesn't.
agree, and
Yeah.
Why Beis Shammai? That seems to be Rashi saying in the end, like
Yeah.
6 lines into the note.
But like the integrity of Rav Ashi's answer is ruined when he backtracks and says Shlosha L'divrei Hakol. But really Tu B'Shvat.
Right.
No, if you're saying Tu B'Shvat counts
Rashi's
as
phrase is another way of saying exactly what you said.
Right.
It doesn't, I don't think.
right, but he didn't write it in a question. He didn't write it in a question form. But I don't know. It requires a little bit of effort. So our Mishnah quoted a machlokes about when the time of Meiser Behema was. So we've discussed this briefly, that Meiser Behema, the way that it works is that, let's say a person makes $100,000 in a year. So they have to give taxes on that, or they have to pay Meiser. Let's talk in halachic terms. You have to pay Meiser. Where do we measure that from? Is it from Rosh Hashana to Rosh Hashana? Is it the fiscal year, right? You're going from July 1 until, how does that work? Let's say in the day after you get a bump, you get a raise, you get a bonus, or let's say the day after you get dinged, your taxes get paid. Like how do we figure all that out? So when it comes to Meiser Behema, that's a machlokes in our Mishnah on Daf Beis. The Mishnah on Daf Beis says that according to some it's in Tishrei, Aleph Tishrei, and according to some it's in Aleph Elul. So that means that by that day you look at how many animals were born. You have to know, you got to keep track. So we know that a lot of the animals that we see, they have earrings or clips or necklaces or bracelets, whatever they have. That's our halachic obligation. But there's a machlokes in regards to whether or not it's on Aleph Tishrei or if it's Aleph Elul. And let's learn as to where this machlokes comes from. Rav Yochanan, Ushneim Mikra Echad Darshu. Both of them, both shitas, the shita that says that Meiser Behema, the deadline is Aleph Tishrei, and the one who says that it's Aleph Elul is from the same pasuk. Here's what the pasuk reads: Shenemar lavshu karim hatzon. The tzon are wearing karim, wearing garments. This is, we'll see, is a metaphor for pregnancy. It's a time when the animals will conceive. And let me just read this properly. Hold on one second. Where is it? What pasuk is this? Is this Aleph? No, it's Aleph. Lavshu karim hatzon va'amakim yatfu var. So the tzon will be dressed up. Again, a metaphor for conception. Va'amakim yatfu var. It'll be when the valleys are filled with wild growths. Yisro'au, they will make sounds. Af yashiru, they'll even sing. This is a reference to the time of season, and we're not agricultural people. And when I drive through the cornfields of Illinois to go do circumcisions in the middle of nowhere, I do not roll down my windows. But what this is referring to is the rustling of the leaves in the wind, that it has a beautiful sound to them. That's what this part of the pasuk means. So there's 3 parts of the pasuk. The first one is a metaphor for conception of animals. The second is to reference that there's growth of vegetation in the valleys. And the third is that sound of rustling toward the end of the harvesting season. Now, let's see how the Tanaim look at this. Rav Meir Savar, Emasai Lavshu Karim Hatzon. When is it that the Lavshu Karim Hatzon, that the tzon conceived? That's Bisman She'amakim Yatfuvar. That's when we see the growth of vegetation in this particular valley. Emasai Amakim Yatfuvar. When is that? Be'adar. So the animals are misabros be'adar. The mating season is in Adar. V'yoldos be'av. And therefore, Rosh Hashana shelahem elu. He looks at part 1 of the pasuk. He says part 1 happens during part 2 of the pasuk, and we have yet to understand part 3. We'll get there soon. Rabbi Lazar, Reb Shimon, Omrim, Eimas I love Shukarim Hatzon. When do we say is the time? When is the mating season of these animals? It's not in Amakim Yatu Bar, but rather Bisman She Yisro'au Af Yashiru, at the time when the harvest. This is a later part of the year, a later time in the year. It's like a month later, which is Tishrei. Eimasai Shibolim Omrim Shira. When is that? That is Benisan. So if that's the case, then Misabros Benisan, instead of the Shita of Reb Meir, where they conceived in Adar, they conceived in Nisan. The Yoldos Be'elul, they'd have their children, progeny. They'd have their progeny on Rosh Hashana Shelahem. That would then be Tishrei. So that means that they're machlokes. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. It was a layup. So then, and I did not think about this while I was preparing because I was too stressed, but it just hit me right now. So what the Gemara is saying, they just have a machlokes how to understand the pasuk. Is the conceiving time a little earlier when the vegetation is growing, or is it a little later when it's already rustling in the wind? That fully grown cornfield is what I'm envisioning. So that's Tishrei. So that's the machlokes between them. So the Gemara says, look, your analysis of the pasuk one way or the other is great, but each of you ignored one of the sections of the pasuk. B'idach nami, Rav Meir, you ignored the part of the pasuk Haksiv Yisro'au Af Yashiru. it says that in the pasuk as well, that it's at a time when you hear the rustling of the winds. What's that referring to? So it says the Gemara, a third of the way down, Hahu be'aflasa dehavyan benisa. There were some animals that did conceive at that time, but that was not the normal mating time. It was normally the month of Adar, and that fits with his shita. V'idach nami. What about the second shita, the shita of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon? According to you, you also forgot a part of the pasuk. V'idach nami aksiva amakim yatvuvar. What about the fact that there should be vegetation growing? How do you explain that? So it says the Gemara, that was for the animals that conceived earlier than the normal mating season. And yes, you're right. There are some of those animals, but the primary month was a month later. So it says the Gemara, hold on one second. Here, the pasuk has three parts. It says that lavshu charam hatzon, that they'll conceive, the amakim yatvuvar, and then it says there's going to be growth in the valley, and then it says it's going to be rustling in the winds. So bishlam ala Rav Meir. The way that Rav Meir learned the pasuk was step one leads to step two and then leads to step three. Kidichsiv. That's how the pasuk was written. First, he said lav shucharim hatzon. When is that? Bisman she'amakim yatvuvar. The ikonami. There are some animals that are yisrael af yashir that conceive later. Very smooth pasuk. That's a very smooth reading of the pasuk. You learn section 1, section 2, and section 3 of the pasuk. Ela Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon ibchamim ba'alei. According to the way that they read the pasuk, they read pasuk one, part 1 of the pasuk leads to part 3 of the pasuk. They skipped part 2. So then ipcha, the pasuk, according to them, should have been flipped. It should have been 1, 3, 2 instead of 1, 2, 3 for the pasuk. So it says the Gemara, it should have been lav shukarim hatzon, and then it should have said, which it doesn't, bisman shisro af yashiru, the ikanami, and then there are still those da'amakim yatvuvar, but it doesn't. The pasuk, they learned the pasuk out of order. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. That doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says you're absolutely right. Ella, Amar Rava, the Kule Alma, really everyone. Rav Meir on the one side and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other. They agree. Lav Shukarim Atzom Bizman Sham Makim Yatfu Bar Be'adar. They agree that mating season is going to be an Adar. They agree, and that's not where their machlokes is. So where is the machlokes in our Mishnah on Daf Beis as to when Meiser Behema should take place? That machlokes is unrelated. Really, the machlokes that we have in our Mishnah between Rav Meir on the one side and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other is the famous pasuk of aser to aser. And in this pasuk says the Gemara, B'shnei Maisros HaKasuv Medaber. The pasuk is speaking about two different types of Meiser. Echad Meiser Behema, ve'echad Meiser Dagan. One is talking about Meiser Behema. That's the topic of our Mishnah. Ve'echad Meiser Dagan, which is not the topic of our Mishnah. And the question is, how do we learn from one to the other? Rav Meir Savar. Rav Meir says, "Makish Meiser Behema LaMeiser Dagan." We can learn something about Meiser Behema in our Mishnah from the world of Meiser Dagan. Ma Meiser Dagan Samuch Legomro Isuro. That at the time that it becomes ripe, that's when we do Meiser. Meiser Behema Samuch Legomro Isuro. That's talking about the month of Elul, which in harvesting season was when you brought everything into the house. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Sabre. I agree that there's a hekesh Makish Meiser Behema LaMeiser Dagan. I agree, but it's based on something else. Ma Meiser Dagan. That when it comes to grains, Rosh Hashana Shelo Tishrei. Af Meiser Behema Rosh Hashana Shelo Tishrei. So in conclusion, our machlokes is not about this pasuk and when the mating season is of the animals. That has nothing to do with this at all. We don't know how to properly compare when the pasuk says aser to aser. That when we try to make a comparison between Meiser Dagan and Meiser Behema, we don't know exactly how to make it. Do we make it based on when the animals are brought in? Or do we make it based on the halachic determination of Meiser Dagan, which is Tishrei? That's the machlokes in our Mishnah. And the Gemara leaves this at the 2 dots. And we are 3/4 of the way down on Daf Ches and Aleph. Let us continue. We said in our Mishnah, Be'echad b'Tishrei Rosh Hashana l'shanim. Famously, this is, Rosh Hashana, like we use the word Rosh Hashana, right? So you kind of get like swallowed in the terminologies here. This is like Rosh Hashana, like we casually use the term. The Mai Hilchasa. Why? What's the big deal? So says the Gemara, because Amara Papa L'Shtaros. This should sound familiar. The first sugya that we learned in the Maseches was all about this. That we said that we when we write on things for the 4th year of the reign of King X. So says the Gemara, it's also the Shtaros. People will say, what year is it? Well, Rosh Hashanah just passed. It's Tashin Pei Beis. So we do this now on Ksubas and on Gittin. We'll write this, Chameshes, I love him, whatever. Like you're like familiar with the language. But Yom Echad, L'chodesh Nisan, whatever the case is, and then b'chamesh alav and shvamei shmona mushtayim leminyan shana monan kan be'ir Chicago. That's like the language we're used to. That's this. It's l'shtaros. That's what we're concerned about. That's why there's an afkamina in regards to saying what year it is. 5782. Ditznan shtari chov hamukdam and psul. We're going to avoid this sugya for now. That when you predate a document, it can be problematic. But if you post-date one, it can be okay. Don't take any halachic psak from this. We have to learn the sugya in full. Says the Gemara, wait a second. We learned in our Mishnah, Be'echa B'nisan Rosh Hashana L'Malachim. We already, what did we say? What did we just say here? We said Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashana for years. And why? Because of Shtaros. And then a second later in our Mishnah on Daf Beis, it said that Rosh Hashana L'Malachim was Echad B'nisan. So which one is it? Not only that, Ve'amrinan, we even said to teach our Mishnah back in the day on Daf Beis, L'may Hilchasav Amrav Chizah L'Shtaros. So which one is it? Is the star concerned from the kings? And it's Aleph Nisan, or is the star concerned for the years, like we know it, Tafshin Pei Beis, and therefore it should be Aleph Tishrei. Says the Gemara, Lo Kasha, Kan L'Malchei Yisrael, Kan L'Malchei Umos Olam. It depends. For the Yidden, it's going to be one, and for the Goyim, it's going to be another. For the Yidden, it's going to be Aleph Tishrei. That's our year. And for the kings, it's always going to be Aleph Nisan, all the Marim Makomos we saw many blood ago. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. Elahada Amar Rav Chiza Tada Halacha, Lo Shanu Ela L'Malchei Yisrael. We learned as a caveat to our Mishnah that when we say that it's Aleph Nisan or it's Aleph Tishrei, whichever it was, that's only L'Malchei Yisrael. That when it comes to Malchei Masa Olam, it's always going to be Tishrei. So says the Gemara, Rav Chiza, Mas Nisan Asa Lashmuina. You just answered me 3 lines ago, Lo Kasha. This is talking about that, and that is talking about this. But if that's how we're explaining the 2 parts of our Mishnah, then why does Rav Chiza on Daf Gimel say something that's obvious in a Mishnah? Your Amoraim don't waste their words. He didn't give shiur on a topic that everybody knew about. This was basic juxtaposing of 2 Mishnayos, and every little kid in yeshiva back in the day knew how to answer these Mishnayos. Oh, that dates from Malchei Yisrael, and that dates from Malchei Masulam. So that's what the Gemara is saying. Wait a second. Ella, is it actually the case? Ella, the Amar Rav Chizda, when Rav Chizda made the distinction of Lo Shanu, Ella Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Masulam, Tishrei Manina, Rav Chizda Mas Nisan Asa Lashmina. It's coming to teach me the ABCs of a Mishnah. No way. Can't be. Says the Gemara, lo. That's not what Rav Chizda is coming to teach you. What is he coming to teach you? Rav Chizda Kroi Asa Lashmina. He was coming to teach us how to understand the psukim that led up to this, and we'd have to look back on Daf Gimel to see how he touched everything. But that's what Rav Chizda was doing. No, he wasn't teaching us what the din was. He was teaching us how we got to that distinction. Some say no, Rav Chizda wasn't talking about this at all, and really our Mishnah is totally different. This is a difficult answer in the Gemara, but Rav Chizda Reb Zera Masnila, Reb Zera Amar that's Kufa. Reb Zera says that the Aleph Tishrei of our Mishnah wasn't talking about Shtaros at all. It was talking about the starts of seasons. The Rabbi Lazarhi, and that's rooted, Reb Zera the Amora was rooted in Rabbi Eliezer the Tana, who said, "To Amar b'Tishrei nivra ha'olam," and that was the first season. And we know that there are 4 seasons. We are currently turning seasons right now. So that all starts in Tishrei. That all starts in the month of Tishrei, and it's approximately the case because Tishrei is effectively very close to fall. It doesn't always line up that way here because we have the 29 days that we sometimes add to the calendar, and we will understand next year when Tishrei hits that it will be significantly later in the year, and I hope not colder, but if history is of anything to learn from, it'll probably be colder. So all of this is approach number 1. We tried the Shtaros one. We got a little confused with Rav Chizda, and Rav Chizda had a different approach entirely, that maybe he's just saying that it's not about Shtaros at all, and maybe it's really only about Tkufos, about the seasons. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar the Din. Really, Aleph Tishrei is all about Din. This already is reminiscent of the way that we look at the world. We have the month of Elul, it builds up to Tishrei, and that is the month of Din. Okay. So says the Gemara, famous pasuk from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. Wow. From the beginning of the year, it is judged what will be in the end of the year. Not the other way. It's not the Musar way of like, I'm going to say at the end of the year what you did in the beginning. The din is that from Rosh Hashana, your year will be dictated, which is an unbelievable idea and is terrifying and comforting all at the same time. So that's what the Gemara says. That's pshat, is Meireshis Hashana Nidon Ma Yehe B'Sofa. Says the Gemara, that's beautiful, but the pasuk doesn't say that it's Tishrei. Memayda Tishrei, could be any time of the year. Meireshis Hashana, maybe it's Nisan. We don't know when it is. So it says the Gemara, Memayda Tishrei Dechsiv Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar B'Kesed Yom Chagenu. It has to be at a time that it's going to be by Tkiyas Shofar. and that's Bekeseh Yom Chagin. What does Bekeseh mean? Ezehu Chag, turning to the top of Chesed Beis. What is the holiday Shah Chodesh Miskasebo? At a time when the moon is covered, doesn't literally mean covered. It means that the moon is most difficult to see. What holiday has a very, very, very small sliver of the moon? Havayom is the Rosh Hashana, because there are no other holidays that start then. Right? When you look at the sky on the night of Sukkot, you're going to see a full moon, a perfect full moon, almost perfect. I mean, down to minutes already. It's so perfect. Same exact thing is going to be true Pesach and Sukkot. And Shavuos is day 6. You'll already see a growing moon because the sliver is growing. You're 6 days into the month. So it should be, in theory, 1/3 full by 6 days in, approximately, a little bit more. Says the Gemara. Not only that, we'll see the pasuk continues. And in that month, there's a chok for Yisrael and a mishpat for Yaakov. So we see that there's din, that there's judgment in those days, and therefore we know Mereshis Hashana, but Achris Hashana, that we're talking about Aleph Tishrei being a day of din. Let's analyze this pasuk a little bit more. Tana Rabban and the rabbis have taught us, what do we know from that part of the pasuk? It says, that the Bezdin Shalmala cannot hold court upstairs. This is already a remarkably powerful idea of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, the power of the Yid to control the calendar. When people come in with proper edus, only then is the month Mischadesh, and only then does the Bezdin Shalmala open its doors to begin din. That's what the Gemara says here. It's Malamed she'ein Bezdin Shalmala nichnasin ladin, and they cannot start their proceedings upstairs. Elaim kain kitchu Bezdin Shalmata Sachodesh. And Tanya Idach, we have another brisa about the same pasuk. Kichok Yisrael hu. What do we learn for the first part of this pasuk? Ein li ela li Yisrael. I only know that the Jews are going to be judged. Ulu ha'olam minayin. How do I know that the non-Jews will be judged as well? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar mishpat le'elokei Yaakov, that there'll be a mishpat from the Elokei Yaakov, from the God of Yaakov. It's a double language. One's Yisrael, one's Yaakov. So one's talking about the Jews, one's talking about the non-Jews. Im kain ma Talmud Lomar ki chok Yisrael. What? I don't understand. What's with all the weird language then? If both of them have seemingly Jewish words, it's Yisrael and Yaakov, and one means Jew, one means Goy, then why do we have this language? Melamed, says the Gemara, sheYisrael nichnasin tchila ladin, that when it comes to the annual walk before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, kibakoras hatzon roa edro, we go before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like his flock. The Jews go first, and the Goyim go second. Says the Gemara, Kidder Rav Chizda. This is like the opinion of Rav Chizda. The Amar Rav Chizda, Melech v'tzibur. If you have a king and its people, Melech nichnas tchila ladin, and then the Melech has to go, meet the board, as it were, Kaviyachol. So then the Melech would go first, and the people would go second. Shneimar mishpat avdo, mishpat amo, that it should be first the judgment of his servant, and then the servant's nation, my taima. What is the reason why the Yid goes first? It's not appropriate for the Melech in the Mashal, for the Melech to be waiting, Lameka Malka Avrai, to make the king stand outside. Avrai means outside. There's another reason why the Melech goes first, which is before HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets angry with all of the people, he doesn't want that anger to spill over onto the leader of those people. First meet the king and then go and meet the people. Says the Gemara 1/3 of the way down, we said that when it comes to Shemitah, that the date is going to be Aleph Nisan. So says the Gemara Minalan, how do we know? No, Aleph Tishrei, excuse me. How do we know? Says the Gemara, that's pasuk number 1. In the 7th year, there's going to be a Shabbason, but we still don't know what month it's in. So says the Gemara, we have a Gzera Shabbat, Shana mi Tishrei. The pasuk says, like we just saw on the bottom of the previous page, which we proved was talking about Tishrei. So we have a Gzera Shabbat from the world of Uvashana to Mereshis Hashana. So says the Gemara, very good, but I could have given you another Gzera Shabbat. There's another pasuk that references another month that also has the word Shana in it. Beligmor Shana Shana mi Nisan. Dechsiv Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei Hashana. Oh, so not a raya. Maybe we then could have said that because of the word Shana, that really the Rosh Hashana for Shemitah should actually be Nisan. Says the Gemara, no. The comparison you're recommending is not a good one. And here what we're going to do is show why we prefer the Gzeira Shava that we just mentioned about Tishrei, as opposed to the Gzeira Shava that we suggested about Nisan. Danin, when we make a Gzeira Shava, we prefer the Gzeira Shava to be halfway down on Ches Mebez, Shana she'eni machodashim, mishana she'eni machodashim. We want the two psukim to be similar. So the pasuk we started with by Shemitah has the word Shana, but not the word Chodesh. The pasuk by Tishrei also has the word Shana, but not the word Chodesh. That's what the Gemara means, that done in Shana she'eni machodashim, a pasuk that says Shana, but not Chodashim. And we prefer to learn that with another pasuk of Mishana she'eni machadashim. However, we don't want to compare our pasuk by Shemitah, which has Shana, but not Chodashim. The Ein Dana she'eni machadashim, which is our pasuk by Shemitah, Mishana she'yeshi machadashim, where we don't have Shemitah. Well, we're going to do just a drop more, and then we'll stop. Really, we're starting a new sugya, but I just want to get closer to the bottom of the page, and then we'll stop. Says the Gemara, Yovlos, as we've already discussed this briefly, we discussed this machlokes. If Yovel starts on Aleph Tishrei, which was the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel ben Rosh, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, or the sheet of the Rabbanan that seems to hold that it doesn't start until the 10th. And we'll see like David asked, there's like a provocative a provocative highlight inside of the Gemara as to what those 10 days look like. It says the Gemara, Yovlos, Yovel, Be'echad b'Tishrei. How can you say it's Be'echad b'Tishrei? After all, Yovlos b'Yud b'Tishrei. The pasuk says it has to be on Yom Kippur. B'Yom HaKippurim ta'aviru shofar. That's when the Yovel starts, on day 10. Says the Gemara, Hamani. Who is the opinion of our Mishnah that says it's Aleph Tishrei, as we already saw for the third time today? Rabbi Shmuel ben Rosh, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka. He's the one who says that it starts on Aleph Tishrei. The Rabbanan still hold that it starts on the 10th. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, V'kidashtem eshnasa chamishim shana. Let's see, the Brisa looks at this pasuk and it says, V'kidashtem, you should sanctify the 50th year. Talmud Lomar. What do we learn from this? Says the Brisa, Lefisha Nemar b'Yom HaKippurim, because it says b'Yom HaKippurim. Yachol, maybe I might have thought Lo tehemis kadeshes elam Yom HaKippurim be'elach. I might have thought, says the Gemara, that maybe the kedusha, the sanctity, only begins on Yom Kippur. Talmud Lomar v'kidashtem es shnas hachamishim melamed shemis kadeshes veholeches mitchilasa. This Brisa is black on white, that Yovel starts on Rosh Hashana. Nothing to talk about. It's very clear. You might have thought it started on Yom Kippur. You're wrong. It starts on Aleph Tishrei. Very, very clear. Mikan, from this brisa, Amar Rabbi Shmuel ben Rosh, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, Rosh Hashana ad Yom HaKippurim, Lo hayu avadim niftarin levatehen. It was a weird time even for him. It was technically no longer going to be the case. It was a Yovel year. So it was Yovel, but the shofar hadn't blown yet, because once the shofar blows, then everyone goes free and everything goes back to its original owners. So here's what Rabbi Shmuel ben Rosh Rav Yochanan ben Baroka describes. From the first of the year till the 10th, they couldn't leave their homes, but this dichotomy, right? They didn't have to work, but they were still stuck in the people's homes. They couldn't go to their homes yet. Ela ochlin, b'shosin, usmechim, they were thrilled. This is the 10-day party before they get to go home. They were wearing crowns, which was typically something that only the owners would wear, but they were on their way out. So that's what the Brisa says. Kevan shegia Yom HaKippurim, and he says that once we got to Yom Kippur, Tiku Bezdin b'shofar, then they would finally blow the shofar on the 10th on Yom Kippur, and nifteru avadim levatein v'sados chodros leva'aleh. Oh, very good. Last line for tonight, and we'll end a little cryptically, and we'll pick up tomorrow with some clarity on this. What about the rabbis? What do the rabbis hold? The rabbis were of the opinion that Yovel doesn't even start until the 10th. So they say, Shanim atamekadesh, v'i atamekadesh chodashim. They only would sanctify the Shanim, the years, but they would not sanctify the months. What does that mean? What does that mean at all? Well, you'll have to come back tomorrow night to learn a little bit more so we can see the brisa that speaks about their shita. Wishing you all a beautiful night.